Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. Welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm talking to Christie Garcia, a California-based leadership coach, speaker, facilitator, and founder of the Mindful Choice Leadership Academy. After a decade working as a recruiter and sales manager in the corporate world, Christie grew frustrated at witnessing talented people being promoted to management and failing to reach their leadership potential. This sparked her desire to leave that environment and start her leadership coaching business, which has now been successfully running for over 11 years. Christie has worked with a number of prominent organisations, including Airbnb and Twitter, and one of her specialities is helping leaders manage their ego. This was of particular interest to me because I know both from my personal experience as a business owner, as well as helping others, that your ego can be both a help and a hindrance when it comes to growing and leading a successful business. I wanted to learn more about the role that ego plays in our approach to leadership and what measures we can take to contain it and make sure we're utilising it in a way that makes us better and more empathetic leaders. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Christie, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to visit with you today.
Brilliant. I'm really excited about a conversation that we're going to have about what is ego, how people can manage their ego, how ego affects leadership. You know, that is your area of specialism, and really interested to learn more about that. But I suppose for our listeners, to begin with, you need to put your own story in a bit of context. And there's a couple of things that I came across during the course of doing the research for the podcast. And I suppose the first is how in 2009 you fell from a 30-foot fire escape.
Yes.
And it's an episode that you've said gave you huge kind of reality check, and that perhaps that moment to stop and pause and marked the next chapter in your life. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that story, that experience, Christie.
Yeah, I think we all have that thing that kind of wakes us up and says, hey, is this really the path you want to be on? And that was my definitely life-changing moment. I was kind of living this really great life. I was 29. I was living in San Francisco, traveling the world. Actually, England is one of my favorite places to be. I used to go there 4 or 5 times a year, see friends. And I just had this morning where I was throwing a holiday party and I was out walking my dog. It was raining. It was the weekend before Thanksgiving, and our building always locked itself. And so we did this all the time where we would get locked out, we'd go up to the top of the roof, and walk down the fire escape, and then crawl into our window. Really dumb idea, but at the time it worked. Everybody was doing it, so why not? And yeah, so this morning it was about 9 o'clock. I was walking my dog, and I realized I got locked out. Went to my neighbors, asked her if she could, hold my dog, and if we could go through her bedroom window and my bedroom. We shared a kind of a fire escape platform. And so I'm like, can I just go through your window so I don't have to go all the way to the roof because it's so wet outside and, all that fun stuff. And she said, yeah, let's put the dog in the house and we'll go through the window, whatever. So we went, she's in front of me. Well, I was talking with, like, we were on the ground and we were just going about our business. She was holding the Christmas trees that I had just put in my window, and I walked right into the manhole. So there was a 2x2 manhole that usually would glide down the ladder. I fell right through, and so somehow I miraculously made it all the way through all 3 floors and hit the bottom. Somehow I landed like a cat to where I didn't have any internal smashing, which is really crazy in itself. But I was in medical sales. And so, the thing in my head was, okay, this is going to be really bad. And I just remember I'd already started coaching, kind of already started my own journey. And so I won't forget it. When I walked in, I felt like that cartoon Wile E. Coyote with the Roadrunner. And, you always fall in the black hole and you could just hear him go, wahoo-wee. I was like, that is this moment. I know what that feels like now. So I basically felt that, and I just told myself, okay, you can either breathe and relax, or you're going to try to, prematurely try to stop this, and it's just not going to happen. And so I took a really deep breath, and I just remember getting knocked out on the second floor and kind of did these flips to get through all the holes, got through. And then I finally woke up on the bottom. And I just remember the crazy person to me is, can I wiggle my fingers? Can I wiggle my toes? Okay, I feel like I'm good. And my poor neighbors, I think, were way more traumatized than me. One poor man saw it as he's on a conference call in his kitchen window, so see me fall through the air. And the other one, my girlfriend, who's at the top watching this whole thing, and had to climb down to get me. So definitely probably more trauma for them since I was outer body experience. But, I think the real crazy part was the aftermath. When the paramedics showed up, my go-getter brain was like, I'm good. I've got a party tonight. Let's get me to the hospital. Let's get me checked out, but I'm good. And they're like, yeah, that's not really how this is going to work today. And because I was a medical rep, I knew all the hospitals. I was, in and out of them weekly. And I told them which hospital I wanted to go to. Like, no, we got to go to this other one, which is like 30 minutes from my house. And so I was kind of annoyed, like, whatever, you got to do your business. And so I get there, and I'll never forget, it's like the Grey's Anatomy show, and all the interns are waiting at the door, and they're so excited for the smashed person that gets, to walk through the door. So I was that girl they were waiting for, and they were all so excited. And I'm like, hey guys, I'm really sorry to disappoint you. I'm on a time schedule. I'm the girl. I'm fine. Like, check me out and get me out of here. You could just tell they were like so deflated. But once they got me out of there, it was a really eye-opening change in my life, because it took about 2 weeks for it to hit me that I even went through that experience. I was so incredibly fortunate. I just had about 5 stitches on my chin, and really just, got some bruises and, torn ligaments, that sort of thing, but nothing that was life-changing as far as physical. And so about 3 weeks later, my coach at the time, I call it my most expensive cry. She asked me how I was. I said, I'm good. And she said, no, really, how are you? I'm like, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm ready to get back to life. And she asked me one more time, Christy, how are you? And I just lost it. And I didn't even know what I was crying about. It was just that reality that, oh my goodness, the emotion that our body holds, the ability for us to silence and say we're fine when we're not, really piqued my interest at that point. And that's when I started to do my own ego work. By the ego, I mean the unconscious brain, right? It's just those unconscious habits, mindsets, beliefs, behaviors that we have. We don't even know we're doing them. And so this whole time I thought life was good. I thought I was great. I thought everything was hunky-dory because I was living the dream. I had this great house. I had this great job. I had all these friends. I was traveling the world. Like, on paper, it looked awesome. But when I had to stop, that's when it was like, wow, I don't feel like I'm fulfilled. I was happy, but I wasn't fulfilled. And that's a different, mindset for me when I started to dig into it. So that's kind of where the fall really shifted.
Yeah, it's that I suppose we all have them in our lives, don't we? And probably have a number of them in life, but it's that reality check, isn't it? And there's a couple of things, you've said there. And I suppose that, we all say it and we all go, yeah, I'm fine, And actually part of that good mental health and trying to care for people is say, no, how really are you? And, it's interesting to hear you say that was probably the wake-up moment that came out the fall. It wasn't necessarily the fall itself. It was that kind of when somebody's checked in with you and you've stopped and you thought about it. And then that person, that coach could have easily just skipped on, right? Okay, Christy, what we're going to do today?
We're good,
but they didn't.
Yep.
And we're good, yeah. And, and interestingly, that then you kind of relate it to, call it your unconscious mind. And your ego, and is that what you would describe the ego as, your unconscious mind? I mean, we all hear about this term, you've got to manage your ego, but what do you actually define as your ego, Christy?
Yeah, I look at our ego as our unconscious mindsets, behaviors, belief systems, anything that helps facilitate how we show up. The thing with our ego, it's both our strengths and our weaknesses. I don't think our ego is all bad. I think it is part of our power. I think it is part of our strength. Unfortunately, I also believe that our strengths are our weaknesses. So when we overuse our power, when we overuse our strength, that's when it really starts to be that negative ego that shows up. Whether for me in that situation, I have a controller ego that has to put on a show and act like I'm fine all the time. And I am a chaser, so results are my thing. As long as I was looking successful on paper, I was a happy girl. As long as I, was feeling like I was doing the things I want, I was a happy girl. But in the reality of all that, that controller doesn't slow down enough to get the emotion side of the story. It just sees the tactical. And so that's really when I started to figure out, wow, this ego is real and it impacts all of us. And one of the, I think the harshest reality of that whole situation for me was because I was in the hospital all the time. One of my favorite pastimes was to have lunch with patients who were in the hospital by themselves. And the reason for, I came from a big family. The thought of even being in a hospital by myself, I don't even process that thought. And so I was so curious, why are they in here by themselves? Why are they dying here by themselves? This is the saddest reality to me. And when I asked them, the same story happened over and over again. And most of the time it was men. And it was always, I worked so hard, when I was younger to provide for my family, or I worked and I did so much to, be successful that I didn't make my family a priority, or I didn't make life a priority. And that really resonated with me because we can all identify people who are like that in our lives. We can, whether it's our parents, whether it's our siblings, whether it's our friends, whether it's ourselves. And I was that person. I think that was the saddest thing for me is I always associated that with, sad workaholics that are sabotaging their relationships. I was a single girl living the dream, like I was fine. But really, that story just looks different for our generation. It is going to be women in there too. And that was the sad reality. It wasn't that I had the family that I'm, not showing up for. I didn't make space to even create a family. I didn't have space to even have a house or build a home. And so I was going to be the 60-year-old living in there because I was just an auntie or a sister or a friend. Instead of a mom or a wife or, a partner. And so I think that was the saddest reality check for me was, wow, I'm moving so fast. I'm living such this, picture perfect life for a single girl. But I didn't really start to look at it as, that's not just what I want in life. I want more. I want a family. I want a home. I want a successful career.
And do you think that was you and your ego and your personality? And do you think you're doing that of choice? Or there's an interesting one here about the world around us and social media and expectations, and we've all got to be successful. We've all got to be career driven, and success is doing all of these things and being all these people. And so do you think it was your personality, or do you think the environment around you was driving you to behave like that?
I think it was very much my personality. I think it was very much me thinking that's what I wanted. And at the end of the day, I think it was what I wanted, right? It just never shifted out of it. I used to I was coaching a lot in the city. And it was funny because I always would call the guys I was coaching, it was like, oh, they got this Peter Pan syndrome. And, by the time they're 37, 38, they're like, whoa, I don't know if I still want to live this life. Women usually do it between 28 and 32, I was finding. And so, I think it was just that shift in reality of, wow, when am I going to stop and say, this single life is fun, but this isn't all I want in life, right? And I think we live in a world that makes it very easy to never have to shift out, especially being in the bigger cities like San Francisco. You can be a kid forever. I mean, you don't even see kids unless you leave it, right? And so it's like you can get sucked into that world and not think you're missing it because you're not around it. And so I think that was kind of where my personality absolutely wanted it, this great, fun, super wonderful life. And I think I told myself, well, if I'm single, then, this is where I need to be. But then when I would go home and I had all my nieces and my nephews around, and I get to slow down and live that more, stable, grounded life that has more of the family feel to it, I would almost get nervous there, actually, and like, okay, now I'm ready to go back to the fun, because again, you have to train your brain to slow down. And I think that's where I realized the ego was sabotaging those good intentions. The ego was sabotaging that chapter of the life that I was saying I wanted, but I wasn't building out the space and starting to shift my own mindset to accept that that's what I wanted. So I kept living where I was, and it was great and it was amazing, but it wasn't, growing with me. It was just kind of this stale world.
And was there a light switch moment? Obviously you talked about the coach, them asking you if you're okay, that kind of real emotional outburst. And did it change instantly for you then? Or was that then a start of a journey to kind of really realise who you were, what you were?
Yes.
And to get you to where you are today, Christie?
Such a good question. Man, if we could just change that, get that switch flipped and be done, right? No, it's definitely a life-going journey. I'm still on the journey. But I think in that moment, it was about probably a solid 6 months where I had to dig deep. I think where I started to do the work, that was in December. I would say about January, February, late January, early February, the holidays were over, things started to slow down, things get a little quieter. And that's when I really started to commit to myself. Like, okay, the ultimate thing I realized is I was emotionally unavailable to people, whether it was my girlfriends, whether it was my family, whether it was a lover. I mean, I wouldn't make myself available to anybody. And so, I think that was the hardest thing for me, is how do I ask for help? How do I let people in? I was the girl that had it together. So people called me and told me about their problems, and I was like the support system to help them through it. I was the grounding force. So how do I not, show up that way and like let someone see my vulnerable, my real? And I made a commitment to myself. I probably had 20 girlfriends that I knew I wanted to bring on this journey with me, but I wasn't sure all of them were going to make it through this part of my life. And so, because I had to redesign my relationships, I had to really ask them, here's the deal. I need you to ask me how I'm doing. And I'm going to make it a commitment that if you ask me how I'm doing, I'm going to be honest with you and I'm going to tell you, no matter how good, bad, or ugly it is. And at first they're like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. And I'll never forget my friend Sarah. The first time she called me and I was having a bad day, I just started crying, and she's like, you're not the friend that cries. Why are you crying right now? I don't even know what to say or do right now. Like, I know, but this is like a new me, and I just need you to listen. You don't have to fix anything. So it was like we were both having to learn how to be in this new relationship with each other. Now we cry and laugh together all the time. But, it's an amazing thing when you, one, give yourself permission to show up, but two, you have to almost prepare your people around you, right? When you're a tough, strong individual all the time, and then you're asking people, hey, I'm not going to be tough and strong all the time. I kind of need you to step up and be tough and strong too. It really gives people permission to show up. Now, with that being said, I did lose several friends that couldn't make that commitment because of their own stuff. It wasn't personal, but they had their own ego stuff going on that couldn't allow them to be available in that way, which, again, no hard feelings. Luckily, I've done the work, so I knew it wasn't about me. So, I think it just allows you to take who's supposed to be on this journey with you. I was a person that had a lot of friends that I took in all my chapters with me. And sometimes people are just supposed to be a part of the chapter, and you're supposed to let them go. And so, I learned how to compartmentalize friendships in a way that allowed it to be healthy, where before I think I compartmentalized it for it to be healthy for me, but not for everybody around me. If that makes sense.
Definitely. And you talk about ego having can be good as well as bad. And I suppose in my mind, I've always thought about ego gets in the way. Yeah. So, perhaps explain to our listeners where you think, or, that belief that ego can be good as well as bad. Yes.
So there's 3 egos. There's the complier, the protector, and the controller. The complier is the people side of us. It's where our empathy and our compassion and our need to be liked and cared for. And then you've got the protector, which is our integrity, our authenticity, where we speak our truth, where we hold our values, where we stand by what's right. And then there's the controller, which is driven by being the best and getting results, and there's a lot of motivation and charisma there, a lot of image and, you know, achieving great excellence. And so, you know, we need all three to be a very well-rounded individual, and especially, you know, our leadership. That's why I do it in the business space, because if you can build a leader who uses all three egos at its, I call it the 33% sweet spot, you're getting a full, capable human that uses all three. So you're getting the human, the authenticity and the vulnerability and the, you know, integrity, and then you're also getting the results. And that's really what we all thrive for. Unfortunately, when we cross over that 33%, we start to overuse these gifts. And so when you think about a complier who overuses their ability to be compassionate or empathize, they might put someone else's needs before their own. They might not be able to hold someone accountable because they really don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. They might not be able to have boundaries because, again, they don't want to rock the boat or make things uncomfortable because they're motivated by being liked. And so that's their overuse of their strength. Where the protectors, overuse of their integrity and you know, values and being right. It's a very black and white brain when you have you know, I either have to be right or I'm wrong. And so when we look at a protector, it can be very extreme emotions or no emotion at all. And so knowing how to find gray for the protector. The protector has the biggest heart, so a lot of them have very big, you know, Fort Knox built around them, and it's really hard for people to get in. And so they keep everybody arm distance away. But they also love the deepest. And so again, it's a very extreme emotion that you can feel from a protector. In a workspace, they could be the one that's very, can come across as that loud, arrogant guy in the room, or the quiet, you know, passive person in the room as well. And so knowing, you know, that that's just motivated by their own discomfort versus them being a bad person. They're overusing their protector. Where our confidence at 33% is great. It's confidence, right? When we overuse it, it's arrogance. And so knowing the difference of when is that strength overused. A controller, on the other hand, they are, you know, fast moving. So that's, again, what I was. I was a controller protector. And so not only was I fast moving, but I also had very strict boundaries. So I could be a total pain in the ass to people when I wanted to. But, you know, I think that's where knowing, like, you know, I used to tell people, you know, as long as I'm a sassy bitch, I'm fun and everybody can hear me. If I'm not sassy, then I'm just a jerk. And that's where I could really start to understand how these egos get misrepresented in the workplace or even at home in our relationships. Because if we don't understand the unconscious motivator behind them, then they can come across as intense. They can come across as too direct. They can come across as speaking too much truth when really it's just your opinion. It can be coming across as passive aggressive or overly aggressive, not passive at all, right? And so again, knowing where does your ego take you to that darker side. For the controllers, because they move so fast and they're results oriented, they put tasks before people. And so there's no emotion behind the reasoning. They just want to solve a problem, get to the finish line and move on from it. And so that's usually where their biggest downfall is. Getting results is great, but if you're there at the finish line by yourself, who really wins? And so, yeah, that's where the ego really shows up in all of us.
So I get it, and I can understand that. And I can see perhaps what I'm thinking of as ego is traditionally the controller piece, because that's probably the one we see, but it's that kind of mix and that we've all got a different bias. And I suppose the coaching and the leadership programs you run must start with us understanding who we are, which is always a great place, isn't it? And where our bias is.
Absolutely.
Because obviously we must all have a natural bias and a natural split that probably is rarely a third.
Yes.
And I suppose what I'm interested in is, you know, if you do that kind of, you know, test and you understand, or you know, the discussion with you and people realize that their bias is, you know, 40, you know, 20, 40 or whatever it may be, then what techniques are there? How do you get somebody to then change their bias? Because surely some of it is naturally the person we are, who we are, our energy center, all of those kind of things. So I'm intrigued to know the techniques that you would deploy to go, actually, you know, you're too much of a controller, you need to be a bit more of a complier, and how you get people to do that.
You know, it's so incredibly powerful when people do make the switch. And I think the self-awareness and ownership are the two biggest factors. You know, so many of us think we're self-aware. And just because we know we do something doesn't mean we own that we do that thing. And by owning it, I don't just mean saying, yeah, I do that. I'm a jerk sometimes. I get it. No, I'm talking like owning it and saying, wow, when I, for me, a perfect example, I'm a very passionate individual sometimes. And so when I, get into that passionate tone in my voice, I can come across as very intense, very direct, and it starts to sound like I'm angry. And that's when, I overuse that. And so before, and even I still do it with my husband, my poor husband, he's amazing. He'll still be like, okay, you're getting really defensive right now. It's like, no, I'm just really passionate about this topic.
I just really wanted to.
Right, I just really want my point to get across. And so, I think knowing and owning that, okay, just because I want to get my point across doesn't mean my perception and the impact I'm creating isn't intense and too direct and not going to get the impact that I want, right? And so I think that is really where the ego can help us and surface, is when we can take that deep ownership of, wow, what's the impact I'm creating here? It's not what I'm doing or what I'm intentionally wanting to do. It's what am I actually, how am I showing up? What's the actual impact I'm creating? And does it match the intention that I want to create? And I think that is the difference when people start to truly see their ego in real time. And not just saying, yeah, I'm self-aware, I know I do that. It's one thing knowing it, it's another thing owning it. And I think once people start to own it, I don't have to do a lot of the work, right? Once you own something, once you see your dark side, once you just know that you're being a jerk, it's really hard not to own that and say, wow, I did just do that. I'm really sorry, right? But before that, though, the ego hates to apologize. The ego hates to own it. The ego hates to admit that they're wrong. And so instead, they just combat it. They get defensive. They ignore. They avoid. They walk away. And they make it someone else's fault. And so that's typically how the ego works. If we can own it, we can change it. And usually we intentionally choose to want to, because no one's intentionally a bad person. No one's intentionally being a jerk. No one's intentionally trying to hurt someone else. Obviously there's psychotic issues out there in the world, but 99% of people want to show up as their best self.
Good. Yeah, definitely. I suppose one of your challenges must be, though, in terms of working with existing leaders, is that piece around showing up and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a leader where his or her ego has got in the way,
yep,
that's kind of their status quo, and their team and the business they lead won't be used to them being vulnerable. I mean, it goes back to your conversation with your friends and showing up and saying, look, I'm just going to share, and I'm going to, I might be in tears, and but you just got, please be with me on this journey. But there's a difference between, I think, perhaps doing that in your personal life and doing it from a business perspective when you've got a business that's successful and it's been led in that way. And it's not necessarily a healthy, I'm not advocating it's a healthy way of leading a business, but it's driven success to a point. What have you seen, and maybe some success stories, or how have you seen sort of I suppose it's nearly the alpha female, alpha male kind of leader that doesn't show their vulnerability, and how have you changed them to become vulnerable, and what impact has that had, Christie?
I love that, because I think there's two sides to vulnerability, right? There's the complier that's almost too vulnerable and shares too much. And then there's the controller side that's not vulnerable at all and shares nothing. And I think it's finding that balance for everybody. And what I love about, I call it mindful, intentional leadership, is when you get to just be real. And I think in the past we have, right? The hard, tough leaders are the ones that win. Well, they do win, but they're usually at the finish line by themselves, because again, that controller energy wins. Very rarely does it fail. But what is the definition of success, right? Is it just the bank account? Is it just the big, fancy toys? Is it just, the bottom line of the budget looks good? Or is it you're getting all your team members there with you? You have, good employee retention. You've got a great culture within your organization. People want to work for you. I think that's the difference of old school leadership and this new mindful, intentional leadership. And when you can be mindful and intentional, it's not that you have to go on stage and, bawl your eyes out and say how, terrible things are or how emotional you are about things. But I think it's not being scared that if emotion shows up in your conversation because you're passionate or you're excited about something, then that's not powerful also. I think also identifying, a lot of times I work with a lot of startups, and there's a lot of emotion in startups, especially the last few years, with all the pandemic and, the economy and everything. I mean, there's just a lot going on in the world today. And, business partners go through a lot together. It's basically a marriage. And so I do a lot of co-founder coaching to help them, one, take identification of their own ego, but then also how to be real with each other. It's just like in a partnership at home. If you're not real with your spouse, you're going to have a very unsuccessful marriage, right? And so your business partner is the same way. So when you can learn to just be real, be able to handle each other's truth, I guarantee that everybody is scared of the same stuff, right? Business owners are all scared of failing, all scared of, not being good enough. And so when you can start to just talk about those fears together, when you can start to talk about the elephants in the room, that's vulnerability. That's just allowing people to say, hey, this is what's going on. We can either talk about it or we can ignore it and act like it's not, but that's making us testy, and it's making us emotional, and it's making us aggressive, and it's making us avoid. And so being able to just be real in conversation, acknowledge the truth of the reality, and then be able to make conscious and intentional choices from there, it gives everybody a clearer space. It gives a more grounded opinion, and it allows you to be more proactive in your approach versus reactive, because we're acting like none of this ugly stuff is going on.
No, definitely. And I can see it, and we've seen in some of the work we do at Evolve, where we talk about sort of that kind of, term like holistic success, the bit that you can't have personal without business success, and vice versa. You've got to have that balance of success, and I think it also works. I get it, and we've some of the co-founders and business partners that we've worked for, you put them in a room together, and part of what we do is coach them like you do to talk to each other, and some of the conversations that take place when you can just get them to open up. We've had one of the best examples is a business that we were going to work with towards an exit and a sale. And we sat them down in the room and we said, look, come on, let's just talk honestly about this. What's the motivation? Why do you want to do this? And they were doing it they thought they were doing it for each other. Neither wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But nobody, or they hadn't facilitated that discussion. I suppose in your world, they were both being the complier, weren't they? They were both thinking, that's what the other wants, that's what we'll do. But
go along
honest
to get
conversations
along.
But again, I think it's just that kind of piece about getting people to talk, getting them to share, and how it affects leadership. So I suppose I'm really intrigued. You successfully run the Mindful Choice Academy. How does that compare to perhaps a traditional leadership training program, Christie?
It's a good question. I think I get that a lot as far as I think traditional leadership coaching, you get some of the personality stuff in there, you get some of the human stuff, but a lot of times it's more tactical, right? It's more skills driven, topic focused. You'll get your communication, you'll get your delegation. We do all of that, but it's about the human first. I always tell people, if you go through the Mindful Choice Academy, every other program for the rest of your life, whether it's a physical training program or, a book you read, it's going to just sound differently, because what happens is the ego is what's processing everything. So if you say, hey, I want to change today, I want to be a better leader, if you're not doing the self-discovery work and getting deep into what those egos are doing, then it's going to bring up your old habits. You're never going to be able to change them because you're not conscious enough of them. And so really where we're different is that deep dive into self-awareness and ownership. Once we have self-awareness and ownership, then we start the ego management process. Now you're aware of your ego and you can change it. If you are not aware of it, you cannot possibly change it, right? And so being able to, again, do that shift really dramatically in about 3 months. And then from there, it's usually about a 6-month program. And so the first 3 months is self. How do I, recognize even what I do in real time? It usually takes about 6 weeks where I'll get the phone call from participants that says, wow, okay, I get it. I seen the ego in real time now. Oh yeah, I did that thing we talked about. And so, because a lot of times, again, we're not even aware that we're doing it. Even if it's right there in our face, it's been done a million times. You don't see it until someone truly shows it to you and points it out and tells you what it looks like, and then the why behind it. Why are you doing it? We talk a lot about the motivators. And so when you start to understand the motivator of your ego, it's so much easier to see it in real time. And so then once they get through that first, 2-3 months of ownership and ego management, then we start talking about productive communication, having more successful relationships at work and home, how to delegate. Most leaders don't delegate because their ego's in the way. And so again, whether you're a complier and you don't delegate, because I hear all the time, well, it's a really tedious task, I don't want to put this on anyone else's plate. Or, no one's showing up, my employees just aren't meeting the deadlines. Well, that tells me that the leader's not showing up and they're not motivating and holding people accountable, right? And so again, just being able to change language so people see it as not their story that they tell. The ego likes to blame, it likes to accuse, and it likes to judge. And so if a leader is doing that within any way, shape, or form, as we're talking about specific things that upset them, it's like, okay, we get to point out that that's an ego tactic. What's your part? I think the ownership part, the first question I ask anybody when they start to complain or point a finger at someone, what's your part? Is it 1% or 99%? You cannot own 100% of this, so what's your part? And as soon as we go there, you start to see empathy. You start to realize like, oh, wow, I did not hold them accountable. Or oh, yeah, I gave them a free pass. Or I was kind of a jerk in that situation. I get it now. And once we can get people there and get leaders to that spot, you just start changing an entire team's communication style, an entire organization, especially when whole teams go through this. I've had a room of 25 directors in a room, and several of them, would start pointing fingers, or you had all the controllers who are aligned and, results talking points. And then you had all the compliers and their talking points, and they usually do this. And when you can stop and say, okay, what's the outcome we want to create? And you start to point out the egos in the room, and everybody starts to take their part in the ownership of it. It's no longer, we're not doing this because John down the road's not doing it. No, we're not doing this because I didn't do my part. And it doesn't matter what anyone else does. If I do my part, then we're 5% closer to the end. And I think that's the real power when you can start doing the shift of this ego management component. Delegating, collaborating, aligning, talking a common language, so that when you do the tactical trainings, when you start to tell people, giving them very specific ways to delegate, giving them very specific ways to communicate, their ego's not in the way and they're actually going to apply it. And I think that's the power of the Mindful Choice Academy.
Brilliant. And I can really see that, and I can absolutely see where you come from, what the program's all about. I suppose my question would then be, how do you sustain it? Because surely to a certain point, our ego's in us, isn't it? There is a little bit, it's, if you're into your 40s and that's how you've always been, somebody can show up on a training course and can go, oh, God, I've been a jerk, and I need to change. And they go on the course, they change, but at some point does your human inner nature kick back in? And how can people sustain the healthy change in terms of their ego?
That's a great question. I think that comes back to it's life work. Your ego doesn't go away. I always tell people, if you think you're going to manage this ego once and you're done for life, it's not how it works. The ego changes with us, and some days are louder than others. It's triggered by emotion, it's triggered by life, it's triggered by change. So anytime you get a new job, anytime you get in a new relationship, anytime you buy a new house or do something different, or the world around us is out of control and we can't change that, right? That all triggers our ego, because it has us working in a higher level of emotion, stress, fear, all those things is what gets our ego going in survival. And so if we don't find tools that keep us conscious and present, if we don't have, resources that we're constantly doing to keep us, again, aware of our ego, then it will sneak up. I always have clients call about 2 to 3 months after. It's like, yeah, I haven't been practicing this stuff. Because again, we think we fixed it, we're good, and then life happens and we get busy again. The ego loves to keep us busy. When we're busy, we don't have time to be intentional. We don't have time to, have productive conversations. We don't have time to get curious. And so helping people slow down, helping people manage that way of being, so that you're just, again, more intentional with every action, choice, and decision you make, so that your conversations stay healthy. And again, you're living your life. You're intentional about who you are and how you want to show up every day.
Brilliant. And I saw a fantastic, beautiful actual LinkedIn post by you. It was earlier last year. It was about being present, and how actually 6 ways to be present, and just being present in the moment kind of helps you keep control of your ego. And I read it and I thought it was a great post. And now I get it. Having had this conversation, I really get it. I think you're talking about slowing down and breathing and write a list of things you're grateful for and just pausing, taking time, asking questions, moving. Yeah. And I just thought it was a great post.
Oh, I love that.
Very much believe, about being present in the moment, but I can now see how that allows you to check in with yourself and therefore check in with your ego.
Absolutely. I mean, they say that the second you stop and say, am I present? You're present, right? And so if you can just slow your brain down enough to say, hey, I just want to have a breath, you're going to be more intentional because of that moment. The ego moves fast. It thinks fast. It talks fast. So if you ever catch yourself feeling your heart rate go up, maybe you're talking faster, maybe you're moving faster, maybe there's not enough time in the day, so you have 50 things you got to get off your list before you pick up your kids from school. That's all the ego just moving you through life, right? You're just unintentionally going through the motions to get through your day. Slowing down actually makes you more productive. It allows you to intentionally choose what's a priority, because the ego makes everything a priority. Everything was supposed to be done yesterday. And so we're never able to just enjoy what we're doing. And that slowing your breath down allows your head and your heart to talk so that you're actually thinking clearly. You're grounded in who you are and what you're doing. And you can say, hey, am I focused on what I can actually control right now? Am I focused on what I want to be doing? Am I okay? Just having that moment allows you to choose your next thought, action, and behavior versus your ego unconsciously choosing it and reacting for you.
Brilliant. And I suppose that goes back to that conversation about living an intentional life that you spoke about earlier in our conversation, which I think, would be a really would be a really powerful thing for us all to lead, wouldn't it? I really have loved this conversation. It's it's one of those conversations I think I'm going to reflect on in the days ahead. I always end with this question. I'm intrigued to ask this question of you. What's your personal definition of success, Christie?
That's a good question. I think for me, it definitely has simplified. My personal definition of success is being able to wake up, look myself in the eye, and ask if I'm happy. And it's not just, what I've learned is work doesn't just make me happy. I love my business, and it definitely plays a role in my happiness and my identity, but it doesn't make me happy. And I think being able to now really know what it means that I could get hit by a bus this afternoon, and am I happy right now? Did I make my choices well today? And I think that is as simple as it gets. Enjoy what's in front of us, live life fully, and just be intentional with the people. Tell people what you want to tell them, and make sure if it's your last conversation, you don't have any regrets with it. Brilliant.
Beautiful. Thank you. If people want to learn more about you and more about the Mindful Choice Academy, where can they go?
They can find me at my website, mindfulchoiceacademy.com. LinkedIn is Christie Garcia or Mindful Choice Academy as well. And obviously, good old-fashioned email, Christie@mindfulchoicecoaching.com. I would love to hear from anybody and stay connected.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christie. Thank you for being a wonderful guest on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Warren.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed, and inspired individual and business leader. If you enjoyed this episode, then please help us by rating, reviewing, and subscribing. We really value your feedback and would love to have you along for future episodes. And please don't forget to learn more about Evolve by going to evolvemembers.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.